Humans will go to extreme lengths for entertainment and amusement, as history has repeatedly proved. One such example is the brutal practice of fox tossing, where participants will launch live and breathing foxes into the air using a sling, and for one match alone, they used hundreds of foxes. In today's video, we are going to look at one of the most popular sports of medieval times, which was also loved by the kings and the queens. Fortunately, this sport is no longer practiced today. It's strictly banned in Europe and severely discouraged to use animals for any kind of human entertainment purposes. However, fox tossing, fox flinging, or fox hurling is the long-forgotten bloody sport of our ancestors in many parts of Europe, now also known as Germany. Foxes were flung in the air and put to death, and people enjoyed watching the foxes react and fight for their lives by trying to stand on the ground after being thrown into the sky. It was such a popular and widespread sport during the 17th and 18th century that even the kings and queens would hold the sport sometimes in their own castles just for the amusement and to relax themselves watching this game. Because clearly, there is nothing more entertaining than watching innocent animals being flung through the air for fun. It's amazing what people will come up with in the name of entertainment. The practice of fox tossing may have faded into obscurity, but its shocking history continues to captivate and disturb modern audiences. It's not just the foxes, but bears, wolves, oxen, and stags have fought to the death in many market squares in Europe. It started in the 17th century. One of the skilled hunters decided to include hunting into a sport or an activity. The great admirer of hunting took this fun spectacle into his own hands, John York. Hunting was a spectacle for John York, the first elector of Saxony who staged absurd animal fights in Dresden Central Market. He would match up oxen against bears, wolves against boars and deer, and other interesting pairings in these battles. Once the duel was over, John would come out into the ring and give the victor a prize by piercing it through their chest. The gruesome spectacle drew large crowds and became a popular form of entertainment during that time. As a result of brutal games, people became more fond of seeing animals shredding each other into pieces or running for their lives desperately. The spectators enjoyed the spectacle of death and destruction and found great thrills and entertainment in the violence and bloodshed of these events. Joan's love for hunting and entertainment led to the popularity of these events. Despite the controversy, Joan continued to host these cruel spectacles until his death in 1532. Just like a live animal survival show, it seems humans have always had a morbid fascination with watching animals fight, perhaps as a way to distract themselves from their own primal instincts. However, the question might come to our minds that why choose foxes only? Well, in medieval Europe, foxes were abundant when practices like such were introduced. They were present everywhere. You can say foxes were more accessible for use in this brutal sport, but that was not the only reason. Foxes were chosen for tossing due to their quick feet and speed, making them challenging targets for participants to launch into the air. Fox tossing, although considered a cruel sport, was a common form of entertainment among the upper class and royals in the past. During the 17th and 18th century, this sport was mainly practiced by the ruling classes or aristocracy. However, when it comes to necessity, they were utilized by most people. For example, peasants at that time fully utilized this activity for the purpose of food selling or purchasing meat, because somehow by fox tossing, it became easier for peasants to catch birds. People thought the game truly showed the player's strength and skill as well as the animal's agility and speed, which is what makes it so fascinating. The practice of fox tossing seems barbaric by today's standards, but it was once a widely accepted form of entertainment in the 16th and 17th century. Despite their controversial nature, fox tossing tournaments were seen as a display of skill and prestige among the aristocracy. Before the event, a game master and his team would catch as many wild animals as possible, as many wild creatures as they could manage to catch. They especially liked to gather species they regarded as vermin, such as rats, foxes, hares, badgers, and wildcats, which would keep the animals in their cages and they're well fed until the game day. Here's how the game worked. The bouncing cloth was a material that players laid down on the ground in a large courtyard or garden, either as strips of netting or as a combination of fabric and rope. The two players, both men and women, were allowed to play a progressive blood sport. After they were ready at opposite ends of the straightforward lead and their focus was on the bouncing cloth, a fox would be let loose and start to run around scared. When the fox ran over the bouncing cloth, the two players would pull it as tight as they could, launching the fox into the air. The excitement of the game lies in the unpredictable movements of the foxes and the challenge of timing your throws just right to earn the most points. More points were awarded the higher the fox flew. The participants would compete to see who could throw a fox the farthest, with the winner being declared the most skilled. There were always a good chance that the fox would cross a bouncing cloth because the sport usually featured numerous pairs competing at once. The fox was the tosser's favorite animal and the source of the sport's beauty. It seems that foxes, when thrown into the air, twist and wiggle in a very graceful and lovely way as they try to express themselves on the ground. The goal was to release the captured animals onto the cloth and watch them fight to death, with bets placed on the outcome. However, during the game, most foxes usually do not get killed, so they are used in the sport until they can. The sight of a flying fox certainly adds an element of excitement and unpredictability to the sport. The sport became famous for its breathtaking displays of agility and coordination, as players collaborated to lift the fox higher and higher. People were often amazed by the sight of the elegant fox soaring through the air with such beauty and grace. Some foxes can reach heights of up to 25 feet, impressing spectators as they frantically try to balance and land on their feet, which they can never manage as they fall to the ground. The game goes on until all the foxes have been released and players have accumulated points based on their successful throws and jumps. It required quick reflexes and precise timings to successfully bounce the fox over the cloth. Whenever the game took place in a courtyard, the game master would spread some sawdust to provide some cushioning for the animals, since it was a great waste of a fox if it dies on its first throw. Isn't it thoughtful of them? The game master would sometimes release all the animals at once after the players had finished with the fox, and the resulting confusion was said to be pretty entertaining. The excitement of the game lies in the unpredictable moves of the foxes and the challenge of timing your throws just right to earn the most points. Players must also anticipate the movements of their opponents and adjust their strategy accordingly in order to beat them and emerge victorious. One of the things they did not think about is that the games can be utterly dangerous for both players and foxes. While it was sometimes thought of as part of the game's fun, no pain, no gain, the foxes and other animals would defend themselves by biting and mauling the players. For the fox though, it was all misery, because after a few tosses, they got injured brutally and died at the spot too. It was the time of barbarism and violence prevalence. A war was going on. At times like this, what things could possibly entertain these people? One might think, especially when there were not really sports or activities to do, except fights where they can. So people became fascinated with the survival shows. They loved to see the reflexes and the movements of the living beings trying to survive. And so the game of these prowl matches was a popular form of entertainment in medieval Europe, often played during festivals and celebrations. Thankfully, the evolution of society has put an end to this cruel form of entertainment. This sport is no longer practiced. But the rich people of the 17th and 16th century played all types of bloody and bizarre sports, so it was imperative that they enjoyed fox tossing, especially with the myths surrounding foxes from the beginning. They are fast, beautiful, and cunning. Another factor is that it was a sport that mostly involved getting as many foxes as possible. It was usually played in royal courtyards and gardens, but there were smaller fields with canvas barriers to keep the animals from escaping. King Leopold, Holy Roman Emperor of Austria, introduced and popularized the sport. It is true that Joan of York, the first pioneer, invented fox tossing to distract people from the 30 Years' War, but it was King Leopold, the first to inherit the throne after the war, who truly elevated the sport. Fox throwing was a tradition that Leopold established every March in the Prater, a lovely park in Vienna. He was a big fan of the activity. The event was held among the nobility, who eagerly participated in the competition to showcase their skills to the king in fox tossing. Leopold, the first Holy Roman Emperor of Austria, kicked off the Vienna season with a grand fox tossing tournament in the Parada, a large park in Vienna's city center. At these celebrations, the king himself was seen merrily hurling sticks at foxes that had just been thrown. The event was a hit among the nobility, who eagerly participated in the competition to showcase their skills in fox tossing. This was more than just a show of skill. It was an indication of the king's authority and control over the nobility. The fox tossing tournament quickly became a popular tradition in Vienna, drawing crowds from near and far to witness this spectacle. Despite the excitement surrounding the event, there were growing concerns about animal cruelty and the impact on local wildlife populations. The tournament quickly became a beloved tradition that continued for many years. A Swedish envoy, Isaiah Pufendorf, has once witnessed a fox tossing contest held in Vienna. To his surprise, he later on explained this event in his diary in 1672, which goes as, The Holy Roman Emperor and the King of Germany is clubbing foxes himself and throwing sticks at the foxes once they've been tossed, and he did this with young boys and court jesters, which I thought was a little far from the gravitas a Caesar should have. It is a bitter truth that it was a little far from the impact that the emperor should have had, and if he continued this tradition longer, he may have reached a point where the death toll from these festivities could be almost apocalyptic. Well, why wouldn't it be after all? The king himself did not appear to be concerned about the welfare of their agriculture or animals. However, the diplomat's remarks did help bring a little sense into some people. So, these people started arguing about the loss of wild animals, while the majority firmly held their beliefs that this tradition has become a culturally significant event now. Therefore, for decades, the March tradition of fox tossing helped to grow this sport's popularity. Emperor Augustus, the second best elector in Saxony, was another huge lover of the sport, and he was also very strong. He claimed to be able to break horseshoes with his bare hands and used fox tossing to show this ability. Once, he pulled against two of the strongest players with just one finger to yank the bouncing cloth. On the other hand, it might be possible that the players weren't pulling too hard. In one particularly huge event in Dresden, fox flinging reached all-time highs during Augustus' seconds. 687 foxes, 533 hares, 34 badgers, and 21 wildcats were flung and murdered to conclude the day's festivities. At Augustus' fights in 1648, 34 boars were released into the crowd also. This horror scene is quoted in the books, to the great pleasure of the gallantly military men, but to the terror of the noble ladies, among whose hoop skirts the wild boars committed great havoc, to the endless mirth of the assembled illustrious company. The same tournament included the introduction of 3 wolves, but the contestants' reactions to this unusual turn of events were not recorded. However, it is also believed that many writers publicly complained that the wildcats were completely wrong. Wildcats were particularly troublesome. As one writer remarked, they do not give a pleasing kind of sport, for if they cannot bury their claws and teeth in the faces or legs of the tossers, they cling to the tossing slings for dear life, and it is next to impossible to give one of these animals a skilled toss. As they dug their claws into the bouncing material, it was virtually impossible to toss them. Maybe the reason why Augustus ended the event by releasing 34 wild boars and 3 wolves into the crowd, causing chaos everywhere. A quick question: have you ever felt the need to release untamed animals onto your guests? Even if you did feel it at moments, you wouldn't want to do it, right? But Emperor Augustus took this thought to a whole new level. Think of surprising your guests with untamed animals, a pretty bad idea. The emperor's decision to include wild animals in the festivities backfired, causing chaos and endangering the guests. It was a reckless move that left many questioning the emperor's judgment and leadership. The chaos led to injuries and panic among the guests, tarnishing the reputation of Emperor Augustus 32nd. Despite the negative outcome, the tradition of hosting extravagant events with wild animals continued for many years. You would be mistaken if you believe that to be the most absurd thing ever, because the madness does not stop here. At the third time, it was in the court of Brunswick near Hanover that this sport began to take a weirder shape and activity. The sport was held using a theme of fancy dress competition, in which the ladies dressed as Greek goddesses and nymphs, and the men as mythological creatures, monsters, and heroes from Greek legends. They even dressed the foxes in gaudy cloth and tinsel masks, so the foxes don't feel left out maybe. They would dress up the foxes as politicians or other members of society that they wanted to mock. After the games, the players would spend a masqueraded evening in the park, oblivious to the pile of dead animals left in their wake. It's safe to say that animal rights activists were not invited to this event. The event was eventually banned in the 18th century due to concerns about animal cruelty, but its legacy lived on in the form of paintings and literature depicting the extravagant tournaments. The tradition of fox tossing may have ended, but its impact on Vienna's culture remains a fascinating part of history. Fortunately, since the days of fox tossing, things have improved significantly in our relationship with animals, because as time went on, societies and civilizations transformed. These practices eventually declined and were banned due to the growing awareness of animal cruelty and changing societal values. A game like this would be much more enjoyable if it involved rolling a ball across rather than frightening and then throwing a wild animal into the air to meet its untimely demise. It's good to know that such heinous and brutal acts are no longer regarded as hobbies. Our society has come a long way in recognizing the importance of animal welfare. What are your thoughts on this long-forgotten bloody sport? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos.